U.S. President Donald Trump has greenlit a proposed project to transport Canadian oil from the Canada-U.S. border to Wyoming. The Bridger pipeline project could revive parts of the Keystone XL pipeline. The green line here is the Keystone pipeline. The dotted red line is the Keystone XL pipeline, which was canceled. Now, the proposed Bridger system is the dotted gray line you see here. It would use a different route than the Keystone XL, but it would use some of the previously built pipe on the Canadian side. So, what does this potentially mean for the Canadian oil sector? I'm joined now by Martha Hall Findlay, Director of the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. She was Chief Sustainability Officer and Climate Officer at Suncor Energy and, of course, was a former Liberal MP. Martha Hall Findlay, good to see you. Thank you for being here today.
Good to see you too, David. Thanks.
This is more export capacity, but to a market the oil sector is trying to get some diversity from. So what is the significance of this particular pipeline if it goes ahead?
Look, fundamentally, it's good for the economy. It's good for the industry, but in the shorter term. And one of the frustrations that we've had is, and it's not just this sector, is the American economy. The United States isn't going anywhere. Geographically, we're obviously tied to them. Same language has always made it easier. Just the proximity, all of those other things has made it an easier way to go, which is hard to criticize anybody for. But we've also seen, of course, in recent times, just how challenging it is when we don't actually go that extra effort, take that extra effort to diversify our markets, which is why so many of us are really hoping that we can figure something out. We being the collective, my Canada hat on, my Alberta hat on, but to be able to build more pipeline capacity to the West Coast.
Right, so
or the Asian markets, of course.
Well, yeah, tidewater to the Pacific to get that better price and yes, open up new markets. But, you know, on that, things have changed, obviously, to get us to where this is moving higher up the national priority list. And with that, you've had a change of heart on something that you've advocated for, which is the Pathways carbon capture project. This is seen as in tandem. No pathways, no pipeline, no pipeline, no pathways, you know? But you're saying let's shelve pathways and focus on the pipeline. Why?
Well, to be clear, I'm not saying shelve, and I haven't changed my mind about the importance of it. I'm just saying that given everything that's changed in the world right now, this is not the time. So I've actually actively called for postponement, not a shelving. Mm-hmm. But we have limited resources in this country. We have lots of resources in this country, but we have limited financial resources in this country. And we have realized now, and we have a government that realizes we have to spend an awful lot of money on things like national defense, national security, our sovereignty. We also have realized our productivity numbers, frankly, suck. And they've been getting worse for a long time. Our economic prosperity has been suffering as a result. And so what do we do to change that? Well, we need to spend on security. We need to spend on defense. We need to spend on trade infrastructure. We need to spend it on projects, whether it's mines, minerals, energy of all kinds, for wood products, all those things. But we can't generate revenue from them unless we can get them to markets. And so we have to spend more money also on trade infrastructure that can get what we have then that the world wants out to other markets, especially the Asian markets, which are just clamoring for what we have.
Right, but how do you pause pathways? Shelve was the wrong verb. How do you pause it and still get it down the road? Because the grand bargain here is that it's a precondition, that you'll get the access to tidewater and the political support potentially if this is done and committed to. So how do you sequence this to ensure it gets done?
But that's a political thing. And that was very much part of the politics when all of this was first being discussed and when we were first doing the pathways. It absolutely was. And believe me, this was not an easy thing for me to come out and say, because I mean, that thing practically killed me at Pathways. We put so much work into it and so much passion and heart. So the issue now is it the right thing to do at the right time? That was the thinking before, but it was also political, because if you, in the piece that I wrote today, I not only say, look, we need to spend the limited financial resources in Canada on things that are really important to us now and those things that generate revenue. Of course, Pathways is put stuff in the ground. It doesn't pull stuff out and generate revenue from it. Right. The other part of it, David, is that we have to understand how useful pathways actually would be. And so in the work that we've done and the analysis of the costs and the comparisons to, from a global emissions perspective, the Pathways project would reduce global GHG emissions by 0.02%. That's negligible. And so in a world where most other countries are not actually paying attention to this, not those that certainly a couple that can afford it, but not those that like ours, where we're having to make some pretty tough allocation decisions, is it worth spending billions of dollars, of which we don't have a whole lot, on something that wouldn't actually make much of a difference in fighting climate change?
But you're talking about we spending billions of dollars. I mean, this would be...
Yeah, I do that, the collective Canadian. Yeah.
But look, the oil companies would be responsible for this. They would get...
And the federal government.
Sure.
And the provincial government. This is a very big financial collaboration.
Understood.
You and I as taxpayers would also be contributing to this.
Understood. But it unlocks, export capacity, higher market prices, and increased production.
The pipeline does.
Yes, of course.
The pipeline does, not necessarily the pathways.
Right, but as it is structured right now with the MOU, which the Premier of Alberta have put her signature on, this is the path, the pathway they have chosen, two pathways. And I get priorities change, politics change. The physics of climate change haven't changed. And I know Canada's a small part of the global emissions picture, but on a per capita basis, we're pretty high. And if a rich country like Canada can't ever make it a priority, how do we expect the rest of the world to make it a priority?
Honestly, I find this a bit of a Canadian arrogance thing. We feel really good if we can lead. We feel really good when we do our part. But if our part actually costs us significant amounts of money that we should be spending and efforts that we should be spending in other areas, and it actually won't make a difference, then how much of that is us feeling good about doing our part and leading, and how much of it is actually realistic? What are we contributing? And frankly, I think it's really important for Canadians to recognize we should be doing the things that we can effectively contribute to, and we should maybe rethink the things that are not economically terribly viable and which aren't actually going to make a difference. Yes, Canada contributes per capita, partly because of our energy industry, but if Canada only contributes a percentage and a half to global emissions, and the Pathways project would only reduce global emissions by 0.02%, I think we Canadians have to give ourselves a bit of a shake and say, what is it that we realistically can accomplish? Not what we think would be good or what we would love to feel about leading. We have to be pragmatic. This is a moment in time where we're being forced to say, what does Canada really need to do?
But just as a final point, Martha Hall Findlay, I mean, part of the impulse and the push to do something like Pathways is to prove the technology, to develop the technology and maybe develop it at scale, right? If it has potential to work, and I know there's a lot of skepticism about whether it will work, including from environmentalists who oppose oil sands development. But if you don't do it and have the test case, it never progresses as an option in the toolkit to deal with climate change.
Look, I'm a fan of CCUS. I think it's great technology, and Canada has already proved its ability to lead in this area. I think because we have a couple of projects that are up and running. They've been expensive, right?
Yep.
But that's part of developing a technology. We have already a couple of up and running CCUS projects. We could actually do some more in terms of CCUS. The federal government has agreed now to allow tax credits for the use of CCUS for enhanced oil recovery, for example, which has actually meant it's been more viable in the United States. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't do CCUS. I actually think there's a lot of potential for that in global terms for fighting climate change. And I also think that if Canada can do more in terms of investing in the technology and the ways to make it more cost effective, that in turn could actually mean technology that could generate revenue as opposed to just cost. I don't disagree with that at all. I don't think it takes, even for phase one, $20+ billion. We can do that without spending a whole lot of money for this very big project.
Martha Hall Findlay, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on the show this evening.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.